Sure does. Teach all. And then what's the other point he says? I am what? With you always, even unto the end. That even kind of adds to it and gives emphasis to the fact that I'm not going anywhere, right? Jesus said, I'm not reflection. Let's look at some salient points there. Preach to what? Or I should say to who? To every creature. Now, some may want to make fun and say, oh, well, I can't preach to the dog. Of course you can't. Jesus isn't coming for the dogs. He's not coming for the cats. He's coming for those that were made in his image and after his likeness, right? And so this every creature means every human being. God wants us to preach to them. Now, is that just for the preachers? No, it's for all of us. It was Mother Teresa that said, I would rather see a sermon than to hear a sermon. That's important. All of us can preach a sermon in our conduct, in our actions, in our ways, in our speaking, right? You don't need a pulpit to preach. That's the best part. So all of us have that mandate to preach to every creature, and the baptized believer will be saved. Let's look at one more verse in Romans chapter 10, verse 12 through 14. It says, for there is what? You guys speak loud so they can hear you back there and pick it up on the mic. There is no difference between the Jew and the Greek, for the same Lord is rich unto that call upon him. Verse 13, for whosoever shall upon the name of the Lord shall be what? Saved. How then shall they call on him in whom they've not believed? Shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without what? A preacher. Can the preachers, the ones that, receive a salary, or maybe you don't, you're a lay preacher, are they the only ones that can preach? Let's look at some salient points of this in reflection. There is no rich or poor when considering the gospel. Do you identify with that? Because the Lord said, the earth belongs to me, and the fullness thereof. The cattle upon 1,000 hills belongs to who? To God. The silver and gold is his. One preacher said that God decided he was going to count all the cattle on the hills that he owns, and he got tired of counting cattle, and he just stopped and said, you know what, let me just count the hills, because I know I got cattle on them. Only God is rich. This and McDonald's now. The rich must also hear the good news. Right? The good news. Right? So that's sure you get them open mic, okay? But you got to keep it short. Sure you get them open mic, okay? But you got to keep it short. So now we're moving on from the mission defined, where we saw the command by the Lord is a mandate for us. Now let's look at the condition. First, a lot in marriages, why there are marital discussions. So we want to understand their situation. We want to seek first to understand, then be appearances. The emotional and spiritual needs of societal leaders are very real, and we're going to see that. Forbes magazine reveals from psychologists who have treated the very high-functioning C-suite executive types over the years, the consensus seems to be that this group is indeed more prone to major depression, and I've seen it. I'm in the midst of trying to get certified as a life coach, and my teacher talked quite a bit about, because she has done a lot of work with C-suite executives and above. That's like your mid-level VPs and on up to the CEOs. And I mean, you know, we're so behind, at least I am, I'm so behind of the bills and all of that, I have to speed up to come to a complete stop. You'll get that in a minute. That's how far behind I am. Yeah, I'm in that lower economic. So families, the ministry of something like that, and now young ladies are getting into the ministry as well, in Andrews University and stuff, coming out with their master of divinity. And rumors started circulating, but the seating arrangement, she was going to have to sit next to the orange man, so I could understand why she didn't want to come. Then at his inauguration, the convicted felon, the president, Mrs. Obama decided she wasn't coming there either. And the rumors started floating. Material wealth by scholars have specifically implicated individuals' lack of intimacy in personal relationships. Money separates. Riches and fame and fortune separate you. And I promise you, this is the last reference I'm going to make to the orange man. He's so isolated, when his wife was pregnant, he needed to find intimacy with another. Well, you know the story. We'll leave that one alone. It happens everywhere, so, you know, that's a bad example, actually. Pittman, in their piece in 1985, said, for instance, has argued that people who accumulate high wealth often have a special talent and are single-mindedly dedicated to its development and marketing, resulting in scant time for personal relationships. In other words, they live a life of a facade. They're always behind the mask. Warner notes that the very attributes that make perils of being rich, money, go down. My favorite dessert, rather, although I have to cut back, because seventh heaven. The second one, I drop all the way down to the third heaven. By the third one, your grandchildren, there are some who have some decent thoughts and ideas. My undergraduate degree is in accounting. This is just 7 to 8 billion company. I got on board and I was so excited. I called down to his office with a little bit of fear and trepidation. Who's this young accountant on board? So excited. I called down to his office with a little bit of fear and trepidation. Who's this young accountant on board wanting to call the president, founder, and CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company? To call the president, founder, and CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company. And his secretary answered, and I said, hi. This is how humble this man was. Talked for a half hour. He says, so look, when I get back, you know, I'll have my secretary come. Now I'm losing my point. So before we got there, I'll have to come back to the story. Now I remember. The unfair judging. Have morals and values and ethics. I just don't happen to know many of them. So someone is always richer than you, and that breeds contempt. It's kind of like a competition that you know, I've got to get more and more and more, and the love of money is the what? The root of all evil. Guilt of having too much sets in for some. And then you've got the constant round of scammers, fraudsters, and worst of all, family members that chase after your money. So these are all perils of being rich. We're about to leave this section. Anyone have any questions or comments? All right. So these are the perils of being rich. Now that we understand their situation, let's move on to our situation, right? Going back to Kim Johnson's book, or article rather, Does God Call Us to Minister to the Rich and the Powerful? She says, we are neglecting pretty much all of the successful leaders in our community, including corporations, educational institutions, the health industry, local government, nonprofits, etc. She's speaking to us now. And she asked, why hadn't our church put the mayor and her cabinet at the top of our outreach energies? That's a question for us all, right? It doesn't have to be the pastor. It doesn't have to be the personal ministries leader. It doesn't have to be the Bible worker. And you could substitute mayor for school board chair, whatever levels of political government you have. I don't know the levels of government you have here. We have things called freeholders. Why haven't they been put at the top of the list to reach out to? That's our situation. Why not the owner of a large auto dealership? Because he or she is in that same category we just looked at, right? Why not the CEO of the local hospital and the VPs? Why not the music director of the local symphony? Why not the person who owns a chain of hotels? These are indictments on us. This is our situation. So I ask the question, what's the fear? Do you have plutophobia? I didn't make that up, by the way. Yeah, when I ran across it, I was like, what? That's really something? I know all the other phobias. I never knew that one. The physical and psychological symptoms of plutophobia can be quite severe and include extreme anxiety in the presence of wealthy individuals. That ever happened to you? Somebody rich coming in and maybe, who's a famous footballer from South Africa? I know Cristiano Ronaldo, but he's not in this area. But you all know his name, right? And Messi. If one of them come into town and you get a personal audience with him, you be a hubba, 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 hubba. Right? Extreme anxiety in the presence of wealthy individuals, shortness of breath and rapid breathing, irregular heartbeat, excessive sweating. Some famous singer, if you get invited to their dressing room, you're like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Is my hair right? Right? Start sweating, the palms get wet, nausea and dry mouth, and they say hi, and you're like, hi. Inability to articulate words or sentences, trembling and shaking, knees start knocking. You know, there's a difference between the difference, so he can take it with him when he's going down. Negative experiences in their presence, I got dry mouth. In their presence, I got dry mouth. I've got all this anxiety and stuff. No, they are people just like we are. I duplicated that slide. What is the command of the Lord? What happened the night of Israel's release from Egyptian bondage? Let's look at Exodus 11, and particularly where it's highlighted. Speak now in the ears of the people, and let every man borrow of his neighbor. It was going to turn into 40 years. It was going to turn into 40 years. You got to have money. So he said, go get it. And because there weren't like rand bills around back then, jewelry was a form. So we don't need to be worried about this plutophobia. God has given me favor. God has given you favor. And with that favor and the mandate that God has given us in Matthew 28 and in Mark 16 and in Romans 10, we have to go. Trusting in the grace and merits of God. They are just like us in some ways. And that's how we have to see them in some ways. And that's how we have to see them. We elevate them in our mind, which creates the plutophobia. I had one of my mentors tell me, he doesn't get close to the members. You be friendly, you sympathize, you empathize, you cry with them, you laugh with them, you hug them and all that, but don't let them get that close. He said, because they elevate you on a platform, and when you don't live up to their expectation, they're the first ones to tear you down. The rich are just like us. Don't put them on a platform